A racist cop targeted a black woman during a traffic stop, planting evidence to frame her. But he had no idea she was his new police captain. When the truth came out, it exposed his corruption and changed everything. This story will leave you speechless. Night falls over Pine Ridge, a once quiet suburb now changing in ways that Officer James Miller can't stand. He cruises slowly down Maple Avenue, his patrol car's headlights cutting through the darkness. The streets he grew up on don't feel like home anymore. The dashboard clock reads 11:37 p.m. as Miller's eyes narrow at the unfamiliar faces moving into these neighborhoods. His grandfather built a house here after World War II. Now the "for sale" signs keep popping up as white families move further out, and they move in. "Dispatch, I'm continuing patrol on the east side," Miller says, adjusting his mirror. In the reflection, he sees a familiar bumper sticker on his visor, thin blue line, faded from years in the sun. A sleek black Mercedes glides past, catching Miller's attention immediately. Behind the wheel sits a black woman in professional attire. Miller's jaw tightens. "Too nice a car for someone like her in this neighborhood," he mutters, flipping his lights on. Something's not right. The Mercedes signals and pulls over smoothly. Miller approaches with his hand resting on his holstered weapon, flashlight beam aimed directly at the driver's face. "License and registration, ma'am," he demands, the ma'am dripping with sarcasm. The woman squints against the harsh light, but maintains perfect composure. She reaches slowly for her purse on the passenger seat. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" she asks, her voice steady and educated. This irritates Miller even more. "Broken tail light," he lies. "And you were swerving. You been drinking tonight?" She hands him her license and registration with unwavering calm. "No, officer, I don't drink." Miller studies her license, his eyebrows rising slightly. Amara Wilson, MD. The address listed is in the wealthy part of town. His suspicion deepens. "Doctor, huh? And what brings you to this neighborhood so late?" "I just finished meeting with the police commissioner," she replies. "I'm the new captain starting at your precinct tomorrow." Miller snorts. "Sure you are, lady." He taps her license against his palm. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Dr. Wilson complies, standing tall despite Miller towering over her. Her eyes track his every move as he circles her car. "I'm going to search your vehicle now," Miller announces. "I have reason to believe—" "Do you have probable cause, Officer Miller?" she interrupts, reading his nameplate. Miller's face hardens. "I don't need your permission." While Dr. Wilson watches from the curb, Miller searches her car roughly, deliberately messing up her neatly organized glove compartment. When she glances away for a moment, his hand slips into his pocket and emerges with a small plastic bag of white powder, which he quickly tucks into her registration papers. Well, what do we have here?" Miller announces triumphantly, pulling out the bag with theatrical surprise. "Looks like we've got a situation, Doctor." Dr. Wilson's eyes widen, then narrow with understanding. She watches Miller hold up the planted evidence with a smug smile. "This is a serious offense," Miller says, unable to hide his satisfaction. "You'll need to come down to the station." Dr. Wilson calmly reaches for her phone in her jacket pocket. "Before you continue, Officer Miller," she says evenly, "there's something you should know." Sunlight streams through the tall windows of Police Commissioner Garcia's office as Dr. Amara Wilson sits across from him, her posture perfect, her expression determined. "Pine Ridge PD needs change, Commissioner," she says, sliding a folder across his desk. "These are my proposed initiatives for the East Side precinct." Commissioner Garcia skims the documents, nodding slowly. "Community Oversight Board, revised use of force protocols, implicit bias training." He looks up at Dr. Wilson with a mix of admiration and concern. "You're not wasting any time." "I can't afford to," Dr. Wilson replies. "That neighborhood deserves better policing." The commissioner leans back in his chair. You know you'll face resistance. Some officers have been there 20+ years. They won't change overnight. He pulls out a personnel file labeled Miller, James, and places it between them. Especially this one. 6 complaints in the last year alone from minority residents. Nothing that stuck, but his voice trails off meaningfully. Dr. Wilson nods. I've reviewed his file. Officer Miller will be a project. Dr. Wilson holds up her phone, its screen glowing in the darkness. I've been recording since you turned on your lights, Officer Miller, including the moment you placed that bag in my glove compartment. Miller's face drains of color, but he quickly tries to recover. That's a serious accusation. Your word against mine. And my dashboard camera, Dr. Wilson adds calmly. The commissioner had it installed this afternoon. Standard procedure for all senior officers. Miller's eyes dart to her car, noticing for the first time the small camera mounted discreetly on the dash. We have choices to make now, Officer Miller, Dr. Wilson continues, starting with yours. The briefing room buzzes with conversation as officers gather for roll call, speculating about their new captain. Heard it's some doctor from downtown, says Officer Jenkins, a middle-aged white officer with a receding hairline. Miller sits quietly in the back, dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night. His partner, Officer Elena Ramirez, slides into the seat beside him. You look terrible. Rough night. Before Miller can answer, the room falls silent as the door opens. Dr. Amara Wilson walks in, now wearing her captain's uniform, stars gleaming on her collar. Miller sinks lower in his chair as several officers glance his way, confused by his visible discomfort. Good morning, Doctor, Wilson says, her voice clear and confident. I'm Captain Amara Wilson. I look forward to working with each of you to serve the people of Pine Ridge. She outlines her background, 15 years as a patrol officer while putting herself through medical school, specializing in emergency medicine, then returning to law enforcement with a focus on reform. I'll be meeting with each of you individually today, she announces, making eye contact with every officer in the room, including Miller, to hear your perspectives and concerns. As the meeting ends, Lieutenant Harris, a veteran black officer nearing retirement, approaches the new captain with a warm handshake. About time they sent someone who understands both sides of the badge, he says just loud enough for nearby officers to hear. Across the room, Miller stands with Ramirez, who nudges him. What's your problem? You look like you've seen a ghost. Young Amara watches from her front porch as police search her older brother's car, rough and disrespectful despite his cooperation. One officer plants something in the back seat, while the other distracts him. Her brother spends 2 years in prison before the officer's misconduct comes to light. I'll fix it from the inside, she whispers to herself. Somehow. Young James sits proudly in his father's patrol car as Senior Officer Miller tells stories about cleaning up the streets. Some people just don't belong in nice neighborhoods, son, his father says. Our job is to protect good citizens from those people. The boy nods, soaking in every word. Miller stands outside Captain Wilson's office, checking his watch. His appointment was 5 minutes ago, but his feet won't move. Lieutenant Harris passes by, noticing his hesitation. She's fair, Miller, the older officer says quietly. More than most would be in her position. Miller finally knocks and enters the office. Captain Wilson gestures to the chair across from her desk. Please close the door, Officer Miller, she says evenly. As the door clicks shut, she reaches into her drawer and places a small USB drive on the desk between them. Miller shifts uncomfortably in his chair, eyes fixed on the USB drive. The office feels too small, the air too thick. Let's not pretend this is about one traffic stop, Miller finally says, breaking the silence. You've had it out for me since before we met. I know how this works. New captain needs to make an example of someone. Captain Wilson leans back slightly, studying him. Is that what you think this is? You have an agenda, Miller continues, gaining confidence in his anger. Everyone knows community policing is just code for letting criminals walk. Without a word, Captain Wilson connects the USB drive to her computer and turns the screen so Miller can see. The video begins to play, high-quality footage from her dashboard camera, showing Miller clearly slipping the bag into her glove compartment. Miller's face flushes. You were driving suspiciously in a high-crime area. I was driving home from work, Captain Wilson says evenly, in a neighborhood where I grew up. She pauses the video. I could end your career right now, Officer Miller. What I want to know is why. Why did you do it? The directness of her question catches Miller off guard. He expected yelling, threats, immediate suspension, not curiosity. You wouldn't understand, he mutters. Try me. Miller shifts again, defensiveness rising. Look at the statistics. 80% of drug arrests in Pine Ridge come from that neighborhood. I was just playing the odds. And those odds happen to target black residents 5 times more often than white residents, Captain Wilson counters, despite similar rates of drug use across all demographics. I go where the crime is, Miller insists. My father taught me to trust my instincts. 20 years on the force, his instincts were never wrong. Captain Wilson leans forward. When I was 14, officers like you planted drugs on my brother. He lost 2 years of his life in prison before those officers were caught. My parents spent their retirement savings on lawyers. Miller looks away, uncomfortable. But this isn't just about my brother, she continues. Every time an officer like you abuses power, entire communities learn to fear those sworn to protect them. They stop reporting crimes. They stop cooperating with investigations. They teach their children to be afraid of the police. So we're all bad now, Miller asks defensively. Number. But a system that protects bad actions corrupts good officers too. Captain Wilson points to a framed photo on her desk, her academy graduation. I became a cop because I believed things could change from the inside. Miller falls silent, a flicker of something. Maybe shame, maybe just fear of consequences, crossing his face. Their conversation is interrupted by an urgent knock. Officer Ramirez bursts in. Sorry to interrupt, Captain, but we've got a situation at Westview Apartments. Possible domestic violence. Neighbor reports hearing screaming and what sounded like gunshots. Captain Wilson stands immediately. That's Miller's beat, right? Ramirez nods. I'll ride along, Captain Wilson says, grabbing her jacket. She turns to Miller. This conversation isn't over, but duty comes first. Minutes later, their patrol car pulls up outside a rundown apartment complex. People gather on balconies and in the parking lot, watching. Miller recognizes many of them from previous calls, faces that usually turn away when he approaches. Apartment 304, Ramirez confirms from the radio. Male suspect, possibly armed. Miller instinctively reaches for his weapon. Standard procedure, secure the scene, establish perimeter, call for backup. Wait, Captain Wilson says. She nods toward a woman standing by the stairs, visibly distressed. Let's get information first. Before Miller can object, she approaches the woman, speaking softly. The woman, initially tense, gradually opens up. Miller watches as Captain Wilson places a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. Captain Wilson returns to Miller. That's the suspect's sister. He's having a mental health crisis. No gun, but he's threatening self-harm. There's a child inside. Miller frowns. Still dangerous. We go in hard, secure the suspect, protect the kid. And risk escalating an already volatile situation. Captain Wilson shakes her head. The sister says he trusts her. We bring her with us, keep our weapons holstered unless absolutely necessary. Miller looks skeptical but follows orders. Upstairs, with the sister's help, They talk the man down. No weapons drawn, no one tackled to the ground. Captain Wilson speaks to him with respect, arranges for mental health services instead of immediate arrest. The child runs to her father, unharmed. As they leave, Miller notices the residents watching them, but differently now. A few nod acknowledgement. An elderly man actually thanks them. Back in the patrol car, Miller stares out the window, silent. "That man would likely be dead if we'd gone in guns blazing," Captain Wilson says quietly. "And his daughter traumatized for life." "We got lucky," Miller mutters, but without conviction. "Number, we used tools beyond force. That's not luck. It's good policing." The rest of the ride passes in silence. Back at the precinct, they return to her office, the USB drive still on her desk where they left it. "So what happens now?" Miller finally asks, his voice strained. "You firing me?" Captain Wilson sits down, her expression serious. "That depends on you, Officer Miller." Captain Wilson slides a document across her desk toward Miller. He picks it up tentatively, scanning the pages. "Probation." Miller looks up, confusion clear on his face. "Not termination?" 6 months, Captain Wilson confirms. "With conditions, weekly bias training, community service, specifically in the East Side neighborhood, and regular reviews with me personally." Miller swallows hard. "Why not just fire me? You have cause." "Because firing one officer doesn't fix a broken system," she answers, leaning forward. "Real change happens when people like you start seeing differently." Miller stares at the document, a mix of emotions crossing his face. Relief, resentment, uncertainty. "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be," he admits. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not," Captain Wilson says. "I'm asking you to question who you think you are, and why." Miller nods slowly and signs the document. A new sign hangs in the precinct lobby. Community First Policing Initiative. Inside, officers attend a training session where Captain Wilson explains revised protocols for traffic stops. Miller sits in the back, arms crossed defensively, as several officers glance his way. Lieutenant Harris catches his eye and gives him a subtle nod of encouragement. Miller stands awkwardly in a community center kitchen, wearing civilian clothes and washing dishes alongside elderly residents. A young black teenager hands him another stack of plates. "You're that cop, right?" the teen asks. Miller tenses. "Yeah. My grandma says you used to hassle kids on the corner by her house." Miller focuses on the dishes, unable to deny it. "She also says you helped fix her porch steps last week," the teen adds, surprising Miller. "Said you didn't have to do that." Miller continues washing, but his posture softens slightly. Captain Wilson addresses a class of new recruits, with Miller standing uncomfortably at the back of the room. "The badge gives you authority," she tells them, "but your actions determine whether you earn respect." Miller patrols the East Side neighborhood on foot rather than in his car. He passes a barber shop where men eye him suspiciously. The barber, a man Miller once arrested, gives him a curt nod. Not friendly, but not hostile either. Small progress. Miller sits across from Captain Wilson for his quarterly review. "The community service reports are positive," she says, "but I notice you're still reluctant to engage in the bias training discussions." Miller shifts in his chair. "It's not easy having your entire worldview called into question." "No," Captain Wilson agrees. "It's not, but necessary things rarely are." Miller rides with Officer Daniels, a rookie fresh from the academy. As they patrol the East Side, Daniels spots a black teenager in a hoodie walking through an upscale neighborhood. "Look at that," Daniels says, reaching for the lights. "Doesn't belong here. Let's check him out." Miller's hand stops him. "Based on what cause?" Daniels shrugs. "Come on. You know how it is. That outfit. This neighborhood." Miller sees himself in the young officer's assumptions, and it disturbs him. Actually, I do know, Miller says quietly. And we're not doing that. Not today. Not on my watch. Daniels looks surprised but backs down. As they drive past, Miller recognizes the teen, the grandson of the woman whose porch he fixed. The community center buzzes with conversation as Captain Wilson stands at a podium. Residents fill the chairs, alongside uniformed officers positioned throughout the room. At the back, Miller stands against the wall, uncomfortable but present. 1 year ago, I promised changes to how this precinct serves the East Side, Captain Wilson begins. We've implemented new training protocols, revised use of force policies, and created the Civilian Oversight Board many of you now serve on. She acknowledges the audience's applause with a small smile. But let's be honest, we still have a long way to go. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Systemic problems don't vanish with new policies. Real change happens slowly, person by person, day by day. She gestures around the room. It happens when officers begin seeing the community as people to serve rather than areas to police, and when community members begin seeing officers as individuals rather than uniforms. In the audience, Miller notices the barber sitting with his teenage son. The man makes eye contact with Miller, but doesn't look away this time. We won't always agree, Captain Wilson continues, but we must commit to hearing each other. Justice isn't a destination we reach once and celebrate. It's a path we walk together every day, through difficult terrain. It requires vigilance, honesty, and the courage to admit when we're wrong. Her eyes find Miller at the back of the room. He nods slightly, acknowledging the personal meaning in her words. Change is possible, she concludes. Not perfect change, not complete change, but meaningful change that makes a difference in real lives. After the meeting, Miller lingers, watching as community members approach Captain Wilson. The barber and his son walk past Miller toward the exit, then pause. Officer Miller, the barber says stiffly, my boy's interested in a ride-along program the captain mentioned. That's something you know about? Miller looks at the teen, then back at the father. A small moment of trust being cautiously extended. Yes, sir, Miller answers. I can help with that. As they talk, Captain Wilson observes from across the room. The change in Miller isn't complete or perfect. His journey is still unfolding, his old biases still there beneath the surface. But he's walking a different path now, sometimes stumbling, sometimes resisting, but moving forward nonetheless. And in that moment, in that small exchange between once enemies now cautiously connecting, she sees what justice might look like. Not a perfect system suddenly achieved, but a continuous commitment to doing better, one interaction at a time, one day at a time, one person at a time.